Pennzoil Platinum has spent years built around one very specific promise: a synthetic base oil made from natural gas instead of conventional crude-derived base oil. Recently, that promise ran into something nobody at Pennzoil has publicly addressed. Testing on older and newer bottles asked a simple question: did anything actually change inside the bottle? If it did, what changed? And does it actually matter for your engine? There's also a second comparison buried in this story, one that turns out to matter more than the obvious one. Not platinum versus ultra platinum, old platinum versus new platinum. Here's how we get there. What broke in the supply chain, why manufacturers found themselves boxed in by certification rules, and then the lab results themselves, which don't all point the same direction. Why the supply chain broke. In Qatar sits Shell's Pearl GTL facility, one of the world's major gas-to-liquids operations. That matters because Pennzoil's Pure Plus technology is built around Shell's gas-to-liquid process, which converts natural gas into synthetic base oil. On March 13, 2026, ILMA was already warning of an imminent Group 3 base oil shortage, driven by earlier attacks on Middle East energy infrastructure. 5 days later, an attack on Ras Laffan Industrial City damaged one of Pearl's 2 production trains. Shell initially estimated repairing Train 2 could take roughly a year. The attack didn't create the shortage. It made an already serious one substantially worse. And it hit the exact facility Pure Plus technology depends on: 3 producers, under half the U.S. supply with almost no margin for error. That's the math that turned Shell's disruption into an industry-wide 5-alarm problem instead of a shrug. By April, ILMA reported that roughly 44% of U.S. Group 3 base oil demand normally flowed from 3 Persian Gulf producers, and a large share of that had gone offline. South Korean refiners normally provide another key source, but that backup wasn't fully insulated either. The same disruption hit shipping routes and crude supply. ILMA also flagged pressure on low-viscosity grades like 0W16, 0W8, and 0W20, grades increasingly common in modern vehicles. This wasn't a Pennzoil-specific problem. It was an industry-wide scramble, with almost nowhere left to source around it. A shortage alone doesn't explain why a company would risk touching something this central to its brand, though. You need one more piece before the lab results will make sense. What happens when a certification system built for stability suddenly has to bend? Why a certification fight broke out? Motor oil isn't just poured and bottled, it's licensed. API governs which licensed formulations can carry its quality marks through a voluntary program called EOLCS, built around a document called API 1509. Manufacturers can make certain base oil substitutions through established interchange rules, but a substitution falling outside those pathways can require additional approval and testing. When the shortage hit, ILMA formally asked API to invoke emergency relief provisions and separately asked GM for flexibility on its own Dexos licensing. API said yes. It activated emergency provisional licensing in March 2026, letting qualifying manufacturers temporarily substitute base oils while completing required testing, with base oil interchange and viscosity grade rules still in effect. GM said no. It declined to suspend Dexos enforcement or pause license terminations, though it offered expedited case-by-case review for manufacturers who submitted alternatives. That split matters. It means the industry knew substitutes were becoming necessary, but automakers weren't willing to assume those substitutes were automatically equivalent. This is the part you actually need to hold on to. If a manufacturer swapped base oil under these emergency rules, it wouldn't necessarily show up anywhere on the label. It would only show up in a lab. So what actually happened inside Pennzoil's bottles? That's where the testing comes in. What the testing actually found. So did Pennzoil substitute its base oil? 3 tests can help answer that, and each one narrows the question further. First, did the additive package change? That's what ICP measures, and the answer is surprisingly reassuring. Testing described in the source material found broadly similar additive levels between the compared batches. That makes a major additive package change look less likely, but that only answers half the question. You can leave the additives untouched and still swap out the oil underneath them. That's where FTIR comes in. It reads the oil's chemical fingerprint, and gas-to-liquid base oil carries a distinctive one. since it comes from a different production pathway than conventional crude-derived base oils. This is where the comparison gets harder to explain away. According to the reported results, the base oil peaks differed between the compared samples. Not just old versus new, but against a 2023 sample as well. That points to a measurable base oil shift, not simply new packaging. It still isn't a Pennzoil admission, but it's not a result you can easily wave off as noise either. A different fingerprint doesn't automatically mean worse performance though. For that, you need the test that measures how the oil holds up under heat. And this is the one with the number that actually matters for your engine. PDS-C measures oxidation resistance under specific lab conditions. The testing described in the source material reported an 8% to 10% reduction in oxidation stability between the compared samples. A lower PDS-C result means the oil is more prone to oxidizing under those test conditions, relevant because oxidation resistance matters most exactly when oil is under thermal stress, in turbocharged or direct injection engines. But a lab result isn't a verdict on real-world engine wear. One test measures a property. It doesn't predict a failure. One line has to stay accurate here. Pennzoil hasn't publicly confirmed any of this. Its US product page still reads, "Made with natural gas." What the testing shows is a measurable difference between the samples examined, not a company admission, and not proof your engine is at risk. Old platinum versus new platinum. Remember the comparison flagged at the start? Here's where it pays off. Testing also compared platinum against ultra-platinum and found different boron levels and a small ester contribution in ultra-platinum's chemistry. That sounds significant until you remember they're different products that were never supposed to match. The comparison that actually answers the question is each product against its own older batches. That's the only version that can tell you whether something's shifted. What this means if you're standing in the auto parts aisle. A base oil change doesn't automatically mean a worse oil. It means the ingredients moved, and the real question is whether performance moved with them. For your engine, start with the viscosity and specifications required by the owner's manual. Marketing language on the bottle should never replace those requirements. If you drive a turbocharged or direct injection engine, oxidation stability under heat is genuinely worth paying attention to. An 8% to 10% drop in one reported lab result isn't proof of real-world engine damage. But it's not nothing either. If you run extended drain intervals, a used oil analysis can tell you far more about oil condition and engine wear than judging the oil by its label. It's also worth checking whether your vehicle requires an OEM-specific approval, GM's Dexos, Ford's WSS specifications, or a European manufacturer's proprietary requirement, since those can be more restrictive than the general API or ILS-AC category in oil carries. And if warranty coverage matters to you, keeping receipts documenting the oil, its specification, and your change intervals is a simple habit that protects you if a claim question ever comes up. Is the new Pennzoil Platinum bad? No. That conclusion goes further than the evidence supports. What the testing shows is real, measurable, and worth watching. Not a verdict that the oil is unsafe. Not what it used to be, and bad oil are two different claims, and only one of them holds up right now. What happens next? Shell initially estimated that repairing Train 2 could take roughly a year. Train 1 was not damaged in the attack. ILMA has warned pressure on the U.S. base oil market could persist through 2027 as capacity, inventories, and alternative supply chains slowly rebuild. Formulations across the entire industry, not just Pennzoil, could keep shifting before this stabilizes. Whether GTL-derived natural gas oil fully returns to Pennzoil Platinum is something nobody can promise yet. What we do know is that the tested samples weren't chemically identical, and that makes one thing more important than ever: knowing exactly what specification your engine requires, instead of judging an oil by the marketing copy on the front label.